How are you doing anyway?
Well, yes. Jelly babies. Sorry, jelly beans. I'm going to put them away now. Unfortunately, when I opened the pack, they went everywhere. You know, when sometimes you're just delicately trying to open it and it just goes...
Yeah.
Which means you've got to eat them all.
It does mean you've got to eat them all, yeah.
As quickly as possible before any neighbouring mice get them.
You don't want the flies and the mice to get a whiff of that.
No, so I'm diligently eating them as quickly as possible.
Good. Good man.
Hop, 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 hop. So hopefully this is going to be the first ever podcast recording where someone gets type 2 diabetes midway through.
Woo. Fingers crossed. That's an exclusive.
Yeah. Oh, hold on a minute, Sam. I can feel my legs starting to fall off.
I've got that...
I've got that gouty feeling.
I've got a fizzy feeling in my fingers.
I feel it in my fingers.
Can't feel it in my toes. Right.
Sorry, we're not allowed to be smutty this week.
You can be smutty this week. I'm very moderately smutty this week, but only a little bit and only at the start.
I'm barely smutty at all.
Good. We're having a relatively smut-free week.
We are going smut-free. Smut-free September.
Oh, that's not going to last.
Smut-free 24th of September.
I mean, even then, it's not going to last. I've got a little bit of smut in mine. Hello and welcome to another episode of That Was Genius, a fun little history podcast, at least we think it's fun, certain commenters do not, in which Tom, who's eating jelly beans, say hello Tom, with a mouth...
I'm almost finished.
Lies.
I'm trying to speak like... so you can't hear that I've got jelly beans in my mouth.
Tom, the currently and hopefully mute until he's swallowed co-host in New Zealand, and Sam, me, myself, I in the UK. We discuss history stories on a topic each week. Last week we decided that this week's topic would be the law, but everything that happens during the podcast is a surprise. The law!
The law, Sam. It's the law.
It's the law. Did you have fun this week, Tom? Have you learnt something? Good.
I have learnt something, yes. I have fun every week, Sam. And, yes, this week I've gone down a slightly different route. I mean, it's modern history, for a start.
Oh.
It's not ridiculously silly either. It's just quite an interesting story. Not silly or smutty, which is kind of where I've been going in the last 3 or 4 episodes. Historical silly smutness.
Yes.
Silly smuttery.
There's been an awful lot of smut in the last few episodes, so I've gone smut light this week as well. I've got a tiny bit at the beginning.
Smut light?
Yeah, smut light. Smite.
Yeah, Oh, which one shall I have for dinner tonight? Shall I have the smut or the smut light?
Ooh, do you want diet smut, darling, or full fat? Ooh, I've...
Smut zero.
Yeah.
Ooh, which smut shall I have?
Smut zero, cherry flavoured.
Nice.
So just a touch of smut, a little smut, a soupçon of smut. And then we're into some serious history with very little penises. Very few penises,
exactly.
Not very little penises. You know what I meant.
Lots of them, but they're tiny.
Now there's a court case.
So yes, we have been criticised online, haven't we, recently, for the levels of smut in our podcasts. This isn't actually... I would like to point out that this isn't because we've had 2 grumpy bastards criticising us. It's actually because I didn't encounter anything smutty.
I don't know. I did steer away from it specifically this week. But I had an idea of what I wanted to talk about, and then I just rolled with it. It happened to not be smutty.
Oh, yeah. Well, exactly. So it's coincidence.
I'm excited to hear your story, Tom. So should we flip something and get going?
Let's flip it.
I was going to say, let's flip something and get going in an unusually swift start to this podcast, but we have already been recording for 20 minutes. Hopefully by the time you hear this, dear listeners, you'll be about 2 minutes in.
Yes.
Well, Tom... in honour of it being Law Week, I'm going to flip a parking ticket.
Nice.
Yeah.
When did you get this parking ticket?
Well, do you know what, Tom? I'm lying. I'm lying to the court. I'm pretending it's a parking ticket. It's actually not. It's a brochure for Marie Curie Cancer Care. But it looked a bit like a parking ticket, and I couldn't find anything legally useful.
Okay.
So, for an audio treat...
You're not a very good liar, Sam. Because under not very good cross-examination, you gave up very quickly.
I did. But we're going to pretend that it's a parking ticket.
I'm lying. I'm guilty. Dreadful liar. You're worse than the guilty dragon.
I am worse than the guilty dragon. Ironically, I'm lying about having broken the law.
So you were lying, trying to get yourself in trouble.
I was.
Have I got anything legal?
Pretending I was a bad boy.
Bad boy.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
Oh, I've got an envelope here which is my voting documents for local elections in Christchurch, New Zealand. So I flip that. That's got a legal aspect to it, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, vaguely.
Do you want to have the side that says voting documents enclosed?
Oh.
Or would you like the side which is almost entirely blank, apart from a little thing that says in this envelope is manufactured using paper from sustainably managed forests and controlled sources, which is going to be by far the most fascinating part of this podcast, me reading that bit.
Wow.
Which side would you like?
I'm not even sure how I'm going to edit that down. Cut. I'm going to take the side with recycled paper, Tom, being the green-fingered, green-minded man that I am.
Flipping now. Oh, you win.
That's a very hefty document.
It is a hefty document. I haven't even opened it yet. It is a very hefty document.
I'm going to go first this week, Tom, if that's all right.
Hit it. Hit me. Hit everything.
Hit it.
Twat it with your hit stick. Fact stick, fuck stick. Do it.
That was a very out there. That was a very avant-garde poem. Shall I do some jazz clicking in the background in appreciation?
Well, I can't repeat it because
never to be repeated. I'll just copy and paste it. Well, Tom, I thought I got a bit inspired by last week's episode. So
I thought you did.
Yeah. So I decided
because last week both things we discussed could easily have been in this episode, couldn't they?
They could have done.
Because you
yes.
basically discussed a show trial.
I did discuss a show trial, a kangaroo court. Yes.
Show trial.
And you discussed sort of show trials.
I was going to mention this on my piece, but when I was doing my research for last week, which was about witches for people who haven't heard it yet, I came across the fact that there was a difference between common English law and continental European law at that stage in the later Middle Ages. And that difference, or one of the differences, was the presumption of innocence. So in England, there was a presumption of innocence, whereas in continental Europe, there wasn't, which is as a result of feudal law sort of synthesizing with old Western Roman Empire and Roman law. And in Roman law, there was a concept of the presumption of innocence, but it kind of got, as the laws merged...
It faded.
It faded away, absolutely. It faded away. And yeah, so it had been since the time of Antoninus Pius, and he was one of the 5 good emperors in ancient Rome. There's a presumption of innocence, but there wasn't in the sort of Germanic parts of Western Europe.
Oh.
So there you go.
That sounded frightfully historical, Tom. I might have to.
Sorry.
I might have to cut that bit out
and replace it with penis jokes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got a bit inspired by last week's episode and talking about the law. So I decided, Tom, that I would talk today about a few instances in which God has found himself in the dock.
Ah.
Yeah.
Which God?
Well, God or gods. Yes. So I'm going to take us on a bit of a whirlwind tour of history and times when God has either been the plaintiff, or God's been the defendant, or sometimes God's been a witness.
This is sounding a lot like a Billy Connolly film.
It is, which I'm absolutely not going to mention.
Sorry, jumping ahead of you.
The man who sued God. No, I am not going to mention it.
Oh, okay, fair
I
enough.
steered well away from it. Yes, Billy Connolly did a film called The Man Who Sued God, in which he sued God for acts of God.
Is it a good film? I can't say I've ever watched it.
I've not seen it either, hence why I didn't mention it. But yeah.
Oh, fair enough.
We start our Magical Mystery World tour in ancient Greece.
Ooh. With
the very odd case, Tom, of the woman who stripped her way to freedom. Auga! Smut horn going off.
Wow, the cock monitor.
Yes. The woman who stripped her way to freedom, Tom, because it ain't no crime to look this good.
So why was she stripping?
Well, Tom, why indeed did she strip her way to freedom? That's the story. But I promise this is the only rude one I'm going to do. So, and I'm going to get her name wrong. Please don't correct me. You know I don't care. This woman's name was... right.
You're warming up.
Yeah.
You're doing your vocal warm-up exercises. La 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 la.
I'm going to pronounce this Nesseriti, or Mnesseriti, who was also known as Phaon, or Toad, due to her yellowish complexion. Yes, It's all going well in the looks department so far.
Yeah, what a great stripper.
Yellow and toad-like. So...
Pass me my £50 notes. Tuck them in her G-string.
Or that little kind of air pouch in the side of her face. So, yes, Phryne was a courtesan in Athens in the 4th century BC, and she was a famous beauty, despite having the nickname Toad.
Toad and being yellow.
And a jaundiced hue.
Yeah, I was about to say. Yeah.
She was supposedly the lover of the Greek sculptor Praxiteles, or Praxilites, and the inspiration for the first ever statues of naked women that we know from ancient Greece, as well as the inspiration for the appearance of the goddess Aphrodite. So whenever you go into a museum and you see an ancient Greek sculpture of a woman, it's this woman. This was the inspiration, the original one. So a very, very famous Greek beauty. Now, at some point in her life, and we're not entirely sure when, it all went a bit pear-shaped for her.
She put on a bit of weight, did she?
A little bit of timber, yeah. So, at some point in her life, we're not entirely sure when, it all went a bit pear-shaped, literally. She found herself accused of impiety, or behaving in a way that would displease the gods. Now, in ancient Greece, pleasing the gods was everything. It was life. It was the difference between a good harvest and a bad one, having healthy children or having to throw them off hills, winning wars, and everything in between.
Having to throw them off hills.
Yeah.
I think that was just the Spartans, wasn't it, Sam?
I'm not sure
I
it
think that
was.
more to do with geographically where you were born. Was it not?
I think other parts of Greece possibly did the
Occasionally
whole
threw kids off
exposure
hills.
thing.
It's all the rage in Sparta, guys.
Yeah.
I think we should start it in Thebes. Chuck the children off the hill. And it doesn't hurt them that much.
No. Some of them, what doesn't kill you, Tom, makes you stronger. Some of them just need a little push in the right direction.
Jackalus and Gillus.
Indeed. We're left on the hillis. So, yes, displeasing the gods, very, very bad. So doing anything to piss them off was a big no-no. In fact, it was a capital offence. Being impious carried the death penalty in ancient Athens. Now, Phryne found herself in...
Fuck's sake.
I know.
I should have said for God's sake, but
For
that
God's
joke fell flat.
sake, yes. Do it again, Tom.
Sorry, okay. For God's sake.
Christ on a bike. Yeah.
Mary Magdalene's muff.
By Mary's muff, sir. Yeah, so Phryne found herself in court for
By
impiety.
the pubes of Mary, I cannot believe it.
By Jesus' vajazzle. What is this? So Phryne's found herself in court.
St. Paul's twonk.
By Samson's spunk. Right. So.
Judas's great big. Sorry, I'm just being silly.
So Phryne found herself in court for impiety. We don't know exactly what she did, but it wasn't looking good for her. And so, legend has it that as a last-ditch defence, her lawyer, the orator Hyperides, came up with a plan. A very cunning plan, Tom, with depth and layers, like an onion. A 3D chess game of a plan. And that plan was this, Tom. He pulled off her clothes.
Show him the nips.
Yeah. He pulled off her robe, revealing her tits to the courtroom. And yes, Tom, yes indeed, there are an awful lot of Renaissance paintings of men leching over her.
Is that right? This is quite a famous scene.
It's quite a famous trial in antiquity, quite a famous scene, yes. And it worked.
I do not believe this, Sam. I do not believe that males would ever be persuaded to change their mind based on a pair of tits. I don't believe it.
Well, exactly, Tom. Exactly. Page 3 of The Sun has never influenced a single person's opinion.
Nope.
We're above that, I like to think.
Absolutely. 50% of the human population are above that. They would never, ever be influenced by sex.
I think that 50% is probably the women.
The female.
Yes.
I was kind of teeing that one up for you.
So, yes. So, unsurprisingly, flashing her tits to the courtroom absolutely worked. But there was, Tom, there was an argument behind it. It wasn't just a cheeky flash. The argument was that such beauty could only have been a gift from Aphrodite herself, and that Phryne was therefore a prophet of godly beauty. Now, since she'd been chosen by the gods to represent beauty on earth, she couldn't possibly be guilty of displeasing them with impious behaviour. See? Now, bearing in mind, Tom, the jurors were all men.
Yes.
So the dirty old bastards obviously let her go. The defence worked completely.
I'm not sure about this. We're gonna have to hear the argument again.
Yep.
I think. I didn't quite hear it first time.
No, you'll have to come a little bit closer. I need to investigate the divine knockers. Just get my glasses.
Musicals, would you like to play a little tune, please? Testicles, put them away.
Unfortunately, there wasn't such a thing as motorboating at the time, but gallioning her. Yes. Anyway.
Gave her a good Trojan horse, I did. Gave her a good Trojan horse.
So, this version of the story is a little bit doubtful. Modern historians think it probably didn't happen that way. We do know that the trial actually happened itself, but it's likely the stripping was added later for satirical purposes to show the Athenian elite as foolish old lechers who'd do anything for a quick grope. But it is a good story nonetheless of someone invoking God to their defence, basically saying, if I'm guilty, why did God give me these?
I mean, I'm sorry to question this again, Sam, but I cannot believe that any democracy in the world would ever let a dirty old lech get to high positions.
Absolutely.
Someone who groped, that would never happen in a democracy, Sam.
I'm glad that we've risen above that now.
Yes.
Absolutely. Grab them by the goat horns. That's what I say.
Okay.
I don't know where I'm going with that. It's a Greek pottery thing, joke. Haha, insert your own punchline.
I see where you're going with that. Sorry. I see
So next up, I'm going to take us to Britain, Tom, on our little historical world tour of the law. And the year 1378.
Good year.
Yeah, great year. Fine vintage. For a whistle-stop look at the odd history of British blasphemy laws. Specifically, blasphemous libel, or slandering God's reputation. Blasphemy is just shouting God damn it when you stub your toe. That in itself was a serious offence. Could have had you flogged for hundreds of years from medieval England onwards. But blasphemous libel was quite different. Libel is bringing a reputation into disrepute. Or bringing someone into disrepute. So blasphemous libel was bringing God's reputation and bringing the church into disrepute and spreading lies about it. And that was a lot more serious. Because clearly, Tom, God needs some folk on earth to defend his good name.
Yes.
And confirm that, yes, launching this crusade and massacring those heretics is exactly what he wanted you to do. And that, yes, that hailstorm was caused by the old lady down the road who's definitely a witch.
Yeah. And that child of yours that died within the first hours of his life, that was God.
Yep, that was all part of my plan. Yep, absolutely. And of course, Tom, God needs some people down on earth to make sure that the message is getting across, because he may be omniscient and omnipotent, but he can't be everywhere all the time.
No, it's a big universe, isn't it, Sam? Let's be fair. It's a big universe. There's lots and lots to be controlling and looking after.
He's got shit on. He's got dinner on the pot. Unfortunately, the only thing the bishops could do to blasphemers at the time was excommunicate them, which wasn't really much of a threat to atheists and heretics. So they needed something...
You're not going to heaven. Oh, fucking
hell.
hell.
Shit.
Oh,
oh no.
Mate. Does this face look like it gives a shit? No.
Sorry, let me root around in my clothes for some fucks. No, sorry. All fresh out.
Yeah.
So yeah, the bishops needed something a little bit more spicy to keep people in line. And so they forged an Act of Parliament in England. And when I say they forged an Act of Parliament, Tom, they literally forged it. They wrote up an Act of Parliament for royal assent without getting the permission of the House of Commons or the House of Lords, and then threatened anyone who tried to have the law repealed with blasphemy charges. The same ones they'd just written up and forged. So all very legal, exactly what Jesus would have done himself, respecting the laws of the land and all that. So by the year 1400, blasphemy laws were so strict that anyone convicted of heresy or blasphemy could be burned at the stake.
Best thing for them, Sam.
Well, absolutely. It's the only real way to deal with it, Tom. Got to flush out the cockroaches. In fact,
absolutely.
It'll come as probably a great surprise to you, Tom, to know that the clergy had been burning people at the stake illegally for quite a long time before this. But, you know, God's will. Exactly what Jesus would have wanted.
Yeah, well, he did it a lot in the New Testament, didn't he?
He did. He was burning left, right and centre.
Yeah. Spare minute. Oh, could have burned someone.
If you weren't on fire, you weren't there. That's what they said about Jesus.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there was still a problem. This was still ecclesiastical law, which meant that it was law that was policed by the church. And the state didn't really get involved. But over time, particularly as Britain became Protestant, it became more of a common law idea, which means that it was normal for the courts to decide on blasphemy cases, not the church. That did not, however, mean that punishments were any less horrific. In 1656, during the time of Cromwell and the Puritans, who are, as you know, known for their kindness, a Quaker called James Naylor...
They were just miserable gits.
They were cunts.
Right misers.
Yeah.
Miserable people. Far out.
Yeah, I tell you what, Tom, they knew how to have fun when it came to punishments, though.
Oh, God. Never invite Oliver Cromwell round for a tea party.
Oh,
God.
I know. Jesus.
Boring.
Sat in silence, all dressed in black, just eating stale bread and water. But in 1656, a Quaker called James Naylor was convicted of blasphemy for reenacting Christ's Palm Sunday. And what he did was he entered Bristol on a
euphemism?
well, Tom, it sounds even more like a euphemism when I tell you that he did this by entering Bristol on a horse.
Right, not entering the horse in Bristol.
No. Although, who knows? That could have been part of it. Sorry, I'll reel that one in a bit.
Turn the cock monitor off.
Yes, so he reenacted Christ's Palm Sunday by entering Bristol on a horse, because that's as close as he could find to Jerusalem, as part of a protest against the slave trade and the fencing off of common land by wealthy lords. Can you imagine anything less Christian, Tom, than protesting against the slave trade? For fuck's sake. So yes, he was found to be guilty of blasphemy and was sentenced by a judge to be put in the stocks, branded on the forehead with a B for blasphemer, having his tongue pierced with a red-hot poker so he could never speak again, and then sentenced to hard labour for the rest of his probably fairly short and miserable life.
Yeah.
Again, exactly what Jesus would have done, Tom. Lovely jubbly.
Absolutely. And that was because he was trying to end slavery?
Yes.
Good. Bloody right thing.
Absolutely.
Bloody good thing too.
Too bloody right. Trying to end slavery and trying to stop the lords from stealing common land from poor people. I mean, where else are they going to hunt, Tom? Where else are they going to hunt, eh? I don't know. By this time, of course, all the good Christians were Anglican, so you could absolutely slag off Catholic God to your heart's content. He didn't count. He wasn't counted in the blasphemy laws. It was only the good old English God, whose delicate reputation as a cuddly, forgiving and all-loving father figure needed protecting with massive torture and mutilation. And speaking ill of God could get you in trouble really quite recently. So the blasphemy laws in England and Wales, guess when they were lifted, Tom? Guess how long these laws were in action?
I reckon is it as late as the 60s and 70s?
No, later.
Later than the 60s? Seriously?
Yep.
90s?
Later.
Noughties?
2008. The blasphemy laws were finally lifted in England and Wales, and Tom, they still apply in Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Oh, because they're backwards, aren't they? Those Scots and Northern Ireland. So you can still be tried for blasphemy in Northern Ireland and Wales.
In Northern Ireland, Scotland. Theoretically,
Scotland,
yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, theoretically, yes. And actually, the last person to be jailed in the UK for blasphemy was 1921.
Right.
It was that recent, when a guy called John William Gott was prosecuted for publishing satirical pamphlets entitled Rib Ticklers, or Questions for Parsons and God and Gott, in which he presented Jesus as a circus clown. Now, this was his fourth blasphemy conviction in the 1920s, or in the 1910s and 1920s, and so he was sentenced for publishing these pamphlets to 9 months hard labour, which was essentially a death sentence for him because he was critically and terminally ill by the time he went to court. He did survive his sentence, but he died very shortly afterwards, just a couple of weeks after being released from prison, which caused absolute public outrage and a demand for reformation of these ancient libel laws. That never happened, but in 1976 there was the final successful prosecutions under Britain's blasphemy laws. And that was Mary Whitehouse, the famous in the UK anti-filth activist, who's responsible for there being no swearing on British TV during the day.
Just a misery guts, wasn't she? She was
an absolute misery gut.
She would have invited Thomas Cromwell around for dinner.
Yeah, so for anyone not in the UK, Mary Whitehouse, she's kind of forgotten about a little bit now, but she was an activist in the 60s and 70s who basically made it her mission to remove all smut from British public life. Anything she viewed as lewd behaviour on the radio and TV, in magazines, it was anti-homosexual, what she called anti-homosexual propaganda, all of this kind of thing. And she was enormously successful. And she sued in 1976 the Gay News for publishing James Curdrup's poem The Love That Dare Not Speak Its Name, which was it's a very famous poem that was banned for many years, largely as a result of Mary, in which Jesus is gay, basically. And she launched a private prosecution, and it won. Gay News was fined £1,000, and the Gay News editor, Dennis Lemon, was actually given a suspended jail sentence and fined as well. So he was actually given a prison sentence that he didn't have to serve. So that was the last time that they were successfully used in the UK. Even as late as 2005, people were trying to bring private prosecutions against the BBC for blasphemy when it showed Jerry Springer the Opera, although the laws by this time were so out of date, being several hundred years old, that they didn't include TV and radio.
Right.
So that's the only reason that it didn't succeed, is because the blasphemy laws did not include TV and radio broadcast. So the courts have been defending God for a very, very, very long time, and an awful lot of people have died, some very recently, for blasphemy in supposedly a very forward-thinking country.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. What a load of nonsense. I really dislike people who are so easily offended. I really am. I really do dislike them.
Yeah.
Jesus, just toughen up.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with being offended.
Absolutely. If you're not offending anyone, you're not doing anything right. And I completely respect your right to be offended, but I don't necessarily have to do anything about it. Your right to be offended is not my duty to do anything. I was going to do a couple more, but I'm aware that we're running short on time. So I'm going to very quickly rattle through one more, and then I'll pass over to you, Tom. And that is the time when someone sued Satan for ruining his life.
Oh, okay.
So we're heading to the US in 1971 for the case of Mayo versus Satan and his staff.
And his staff?
Yes.
And by staff, does he mean his
minions?
Stick?
The
his
demons.
Minions. Okay,
Yes, absolutely,
right.
yeah.
Were they all named for legal reasons? Did they have to name his minions?
Bob the Demon, Billy the Demon.
Yeah, Dave
the Demon. No, I think it was guilt by association.
So, because they're a demon, they were assumed to be guilty.
Yeah, absolutely. They're assumed to be little tykes.
Could be a good demon.
Could be good demons.
Or a lazy demon that just didn't do much that was bad.
Their demonic thing could just be sloth, couldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And
it's one of the deadly sins.
Yeah. Unless they're spreading sloth.
Yeah, that's making everyone very sleepy.
At McDonald's. Yeah.
So anyway, Gerald Mayo, 22-year-old inmate at the Western Penitentiary in Pittsburgh. Now, he sued the devil for alleging that, quote, Satan has on numerous occasions caused the plaintiff misery and unwarranted threats against the will of the plaintiff, that Satan has placed deliberate obstacles in his path and has caused the plaintiff's downfall. And all of this had resulted in him becoming incarcerated and losing his constitutional rights. So this guy wasn't suing the prison for keeping him locked up and depriving him of his liberty. He was suing Satan and Satan's little helpers for getting him there in the first place.
Right.
Hilariously, he also filed a suit claiming that he was too poor to fight the legal case himself, and so asked the state to waive his legal fees if the case went ahead. So he essentially...
How far did this get?
Well... The case didn't actually ever see court, Tom, but...
I wonder why.
Well, not for the reason you'd think, Tom. Not for the reason you'd think.
Did Satan not turn up?
You're getting closer. There was a genuine full legal finding on the case. The judge, a man called Gerald Weber, decided that there was no precedent for suing Satan, it had never been done before, but that there were unofficial accounts of earlier trials in New Hampshire, hundreds of years beforehand, where it had been decided that Satan was an American citizen. However, it was more likely that in modern law he'd be classified as a foreign prince and therefore have sovereign and diplomatic immunity from prosecution.
Right.
Furthermore, Tom, the case couldn't proceed because, and this is where you got pretty close to it, Mayo, when filing the suit, hadn't provided a contact address for Satan, and so the US Marshal Service couldn't summon him to court.
Oh, for fuck's sake. I mean, everyone knows where Satan lives, don't they?
Yes, delivering mail to him, somewhat more difficult.
Yeah, okay, that's true, that's true.
And actually, this isn't the only time this has happened. In 2005...
Throw in a volcano. Just throw the letter in the nearest volcano. There you go, that'll get to him.
Well, eventually, maybe, yeah. Why not? So this isn't actually the only time that a prisoner has tried to sue God as a get-out-of-jail-free card. In 2005, a murderer serving 20 years in Romania, known as Pavel M., sued the Romanian Orthodox Church in their role as God's representatives on earth. And the reason he did this, Tom, is that he claimed that his baptism was a binding contract and that God and the church had failed to keep him from the devil and failed to step in and stop him from wandering the path of sin.
Right.
He therefore claimed that they'd been negligent and sued them. Again, this case was thrown out. It did go to court. It got thrown out because God was judged as neither an individual nor a company and was therefore not capable of writing up a written contract.
Right, that's a little bit more sensible.
Yes.
Yes, I can understand that finding.
Yes.
This Romanian chap probably just needs to learn to take responsibility for his actions.
Yes, I mean, you did the murder.
Yeah.
That is probably your responsibility.
Yeah, you did it. It wasn't Satan.
Probably not. But yes, there we go, Tom. Interestingly, very, very, very finally, in 2008, there was a very well-known case in which a Nebraska senator called Ernie Chambers sued God as well. Now, he sued God for allowing or enabling harmful activities. The reason he did this, though, was in an effort to highlight and satirise frivolous lawsuits. And once again, it got thrown out because he couldn't provide a contact address for God. So there you go.
Again, everyone knows where God lives.
Well, Ernie Chambers actually answered this back and said that actually, God being omnipotent and omniscient, he didn't just know about the case, he was actually already in the room. Unfortunately, that didn't wash.
Exactly. That's where I would have gone as well.
And the case was thrown out. But he was just doing it to try and basically highlight the idea of frivolous lawsuits and people wasting the court's time.
By wasting the court's time, fair enough.
So there we go, Tom. There we go. God being called as a witness, God being sued, and people trying to defend God's good name on earth.
Completely bonkers.
Do you know what? I'm going to say this. I wasn't going to say this because we're running out of time, but I can always edit it out. There is also the guy who thinks he is God, Tom, and sued other people for using his powers without a license. This is 2011 and the case of Chris Roller, a former US Navy nuclear engineer who's probably spent far too long sitting close to the uranium, who claimed that he was God and tried to patent having godly powers. He then, whilst the patent application was going through, it ended up being refused, sued David Blaine and David Copperfield for using godly powers in their stage magic shows.
Yeah, right. What? Yeah, just a psychiatric patient, really. That's what you're describing, isn't it? Yeah.
Essentially, yes, he's just a madman. His website does claim that he's married to Celine Dion and that he's planning on running for president with Bill Gates.
He has a website?
Yes.
Wow.
So there you go.
Where did it all go wrong for someone who clearly was doing quite well for himself?
Just because you've got your fingers on a nuclear button doesn't mean you're sane, Tom, as we can well demonstrate.
Yes. Nice. Second illusion of the podcast thus far.
So, yes, he demanded $50 million in unpaid royalties from David Copperfield, unless David Copperfield could specifically prove to him his magic tricks were a result of physics and the law and provable within the laws of science. And he had to do that by showing him how all of his tricks were done.
Obviously, this never got anywhere. David Copperfield did not have to turn up and show him how his tricks were done, did he? They got that masked magician instead to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, they got Paul Daniels. He was the only one who was available. Bizarrely, actually, the Minnesota court did throw out the case. That's not the bizarre bit. But the bizarre bit is that they didn't ban Roller from suing other magicians, despite his history of having done it before. They did stipulate that he wasn't allowed to sue David Copperfield again, but they didn't ban him from suing other magicians for the same thing.
And how many other magicians has he attempted to sue?
I don't know. At least a couple. It wasn't a one-off case. Yeah, he's also tried to patent divine powers several times.
Right. Well, I mean, we're criticising him, aren't we? Saying he's a madman.
Well, maybe he's the
How
future.
How many well-established religions have started from some nutcase who thinks he's got magical powers and is hearing voices in his head? Let's be honest.
I mean, you're not wrong.
He could well be a prophet. In thousands of years' time, everyone might be following his religion.
Far be it from religions to be, litigious, chasing people up, threatening people. That doesn't sound like any modern religion that I know. That doesn't sound at all like, for example, the Church of Scientology. That doesn't sound like anyone.
Yeah. Very interesting and very serious as well. I was working hard at this end of the podcast, at this end of the microphone, to try and find some rude jokes. And I couldn't. I'm afraid. There were not many opportunities.
No, I made it very difficult for you.
So well done. And the few that I did attempt weren't very good, so they presumably are not going to make the edit. Failure on my part. Anyway, so yes, we discussed at the start that last week the two topics we chose could have been in this week's podcast. I almost went down the route of a show trial like you did last week. I almost talked about Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu, the Romanian communist dictators. But I decided it was probably quite well known, so I avoided that one. I discussed at the start about the difference between English law in the later Middle Ages and continental law with regards to the presumption of innocence. That does link me nicely to what I'm going to discuss, which is an occasion where two individuals were found guilty of a crime that they didn't commit. So a miscarriage of justice, two miscarriages of justice. And I feel like I've been slightly inspired by the very popular Netflix documentary Making a Murderer. Have you seen that?
I've never actually seen it. I know it was all over. Everyone was talking about it when it was out.
Worth a watch. Very, very good. So I'm going Western Australian today, Sam. Talking of Australia, a quick aside, you mentioned kangaroo courts at the start. And obviously, the term kangaroo court will have originated in Australia because it's the only continent in the world that has kangaroos. Yeah.
What?
And the kangaroo court, so that means a court that
today.
deliberately ignores established principles and procedures or laws, thus losing credibility. And there's a theory, although there is not a consensus on this, there's a theory that the term came into usage during the Californian gold rush in the mid-19th century, when there were lots of Aussies going to California to seek their fortune, a little bit like Crocodile Dundee in the sequel. The excellent...
There we go. Cultural references. My sources today are...
Excellent film, though, Crocodile Dundee, isn't it? It's a classic.
Oh, it is. Oh, it's a wonderful film. I think it shows Australia at its finest, unlike that film Australia, which really is
that was very cool. I didn't watch it because I got told it's so dreadful.
It's pretty bad.
So this story might be quite well known to any Aussie listeners that we have, but I think a lot of people who aren't from Australia won't have heard of it. So I'm going to be talking initially about a chap called Eric Edgar Cooke, who was a serial killer from Perth. And I know that sounds a little bit like a slightly dark opening line from a children's book.
It's slightly.
Eric Edgar Cooke was a serial killer from Perth. Eric murdered 8 people. Let's count them, children.
Yes. 1 severed hand, 2 severed hands.
Bruce, Sheila, Crocodile. And actually, I was... Bruce and Sheila, I know that's the classic joke that Australians call Bruce and Sheila. The most popular names in Australia are actually Oliver and Olivia.
Are they?
There you go. Take that as an interest. Oh. That's my fact stick, and I've just twatted you around the face with it.
You have.
And that's
incidentally, that's how he killed most of his victims.
He twatted them with the fact stick.
Yes.
Climbed into the bedroom window.
He snuck up behind it.
Do you know that cows are the only mammals that can piss backwards? Whack!
Precisely that.
I'm trying to think up stupid useless facts now.
Dogs can see any colour but blue.
Whack!
Yes, so actually Eric attempted to murder 14 other people. 14 plus 8, that's 22. 22 victims, children. There were 22 victims of Eric's crimes. So, more about Eric Edgar Cooke. So he was born in 1931 in Perth, as I mentioned. He was brought up with a violent father who beat him and his mother on a regular basis, so he didn't have a very good start. He was also born with a hair lip and a cleft palate. Most people, I think, will know that they're facial disfigurements that are usually operated on. So he had his operated on when he was 3.5, but he was left with a speech impediment and a slightly deformed face, which he got bullied about as he was going through school, and he went through numerous schools. He was incredibly clumsy as well, so he had been hospitalised with head injuries on a number of occasions and could well have suffered a bit of brain damage doing that. And he certainly had recurring headaches during his lifetime and episodes of passing out. So this poor guy, well, I say poor guy, he was a serial killer, but he really didn't have a very good start in his life. Not that that is an excuse, but really didn't have a very good start. And as I mentioned, he was very clumsy. So where do you think would be a good place, Sam, for a clumsy teenager to work?
Ooh, a lumberyard.
You're not far off. He was working as a blacksmith in the hammering section.
Yeah.
So, unsurprisingly, he came out of that job with a number of hand injuries, which I thought was rather amusing. Quite quickly, he turned to petty crime, even at one point burning down a church because he wasn't accepted onto the choir.
We've all been there.
I can make serial killers funny.
It's what Jesus would have wanted, Tom. Again, it's what Jesus would have wanted.
Yeah, exactly. If there's one thing he loved more than murder, it was praising the Lord through song. Hallelujah.
Shine a light, Jesus, shine a light.
Shine a light in through someone's window.
What's that song about? Keep the flame a burning?
The world just keeps on turning.
I'm sure there was one that we used to have to sing in school. Anyway, carry on.
That's all right. Well, talking of hymns that we used to sing in school, can you remember the rude versions of certain hymns that you would sing?
Cucumber, my lord, cucumber. That's not really rude, is it?
Go carry on. Is that one? I've not heard that one before.
That's all it was. I don't think there was anything more to it than that.
Oh, that was it. It's just cucumber.
Yeah.
It doesn't even sound very much like Kumbaya. And so I was trying to remember, because I'm sure when I was at school there were lots of silly lyrics.
There were.
Sing, but the only one I could remember.
Come by car, my lord, come by car. Too far to walk, my lord, far too far.
Is that one? That's a good one. That's quite a good one. The only one I could remember was pants, smelly though they be. I am the Lord of the pants, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be, and I'll lead you all in my pants, said he.
Very good, very good. And obviously, whilst shepherds wash their socks by night.
Yes, whilst watching ITV, as the angel of the Lord came down.
The Lord came down and did a great big wee.
Oh, what was it? The Christmas carols definitely had some rude versions, didn't they? Or some silly versions. One in a taxi, one in a car. Following yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star of royal beauty, bright. Westward leading, still proceeding. Something, take a shite.
That was a long lead in for a punchline, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. In January 1963, Eric went on a murder spree, killing 3 random people. And there was no pattern to Eric's murders, so they're totally random.
Murder spree! For some reason, I got an image in my head there of someone like the equivalent of someone shouting, "Food fight!" Yeah. Murder spree!
Murder spree! Let's have a murder! Oh, stop it, Eric! Stop it! You did one of those last weekend, and a couple of people died. Behave yourself, Eric. So he went on a murder spree, and the 8 people that Eric murdered, I'm going to call him by his first name because we're best mates, Eric. Totally random. There was no rhyme or reason behind his murders, which made it all the more difficult for the police to track him down. In August that year, another person was killed, but this time Eric was captured by the police trying to retrieve the weapon that he'd used in the murder. The police then connected him with 2 earlier murders, one in 1963 and another in 1959. And I'm not going to go into details of the murder because A, it's just pretty morbid, and B, it's not really relevant to the story. Eric was tried for murder and hung from the gallows on the 24th of October 1964. However, 10 minutes before his execution, and he is the last person... I don't know why I've suddenly turned into Sean Connery. I'll do that again.
He's the last person to be executed.
The last person to murder.
To Moneypenny.
That'll be splendid, Mrs. Moneypenny. 10 minutes before his execution, and incidentally, he is the last person to have been hung by the state of Western Australia, he admitted to killing a lady called Gillian Macpherson Brewer in 1959 and another lady called Rosemary Anderson from 1963. 2 other men had already been convicted of the murders of those 2 women and were in jail. So let's discuss them. Darryl Beamish was found guilty of murdering Gillian Macpherson Brewer in 1961. He was sentenced to death by hanging, but luckily this was later commuted to life imprisonment, and he served 15 years before release. So that went from dreadful to not too bad quite quickly. Could have been hung, ended up only having 15 years. Not the end of the world. Yep. But nonetheless, not nice being told you're guilty of a crime that you didn't actually commit. So Gillian Macpherson Brewer was murdered in a flat by an intruder who killed her and mutilated her with a tomahawk and a dressmaking scissors. So yeah, not very nice. That's about as much detail as I'm planning to give.
Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, that gives you a fairly good image. 18-year-old Beamish gave 4 confessions, which he later claimed were obtained through intimidation and threats. And incidentally, just to make this story even more sad, Beamish was disabled. So he was a deaf mute.
God.
His sentence was appealed 5 times and rejected each time. Now we're going to come back to Beamish in a moment. John Button was found guilty of the manslaughter of his girlfriend Rosemary Anderson in 1963. He was beaten by police and coerced into signing a confession. He was given 10 years of hard labour. I mean, he only served 5, but again, no, it's not the end of the world, but still, not a fantastic situation to find yourself in. Here's a quote from him.
I'd rather not be doing hard labour for 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a direct quote that I picked up from an Australian magazine. "My mind was the real prison and tortured me every night and was made even worse by the fact that I was innocent of Rosemary's death." Now, the main piece of evidence in the trial was Button's car that had supposedly been used to kill Anderson. So the argument was that he had basically run her over and she had then been found dead by the side of the road.
Right.
His car was damaged in such a way that it seemed to fit with the fatal injuries that was received by his girlfriend. Okay, 2002, bearing in mind these crimes took place in the 60s, in 2002 Button's conviction was overturned when a number of journalists who had been supporting Button for a number of years managed to present new forensic evidence related to the fatal crash. So they replicated the crash with a crash dummy and established that the damage to Button's car wasn't very strong evidence. It was also shown that our Eric, so the serial killer's car, was damaged in a way that would suggest that it had made impact with a human. This piece of evidence was key to quashing the conviction that also led the way for Beamish's conviction to be overturned in 2005.
That would have been a shaky conviction in the first place, wouldn't it, if the main piece of evidence was damage to the car with...
Yeah.
No.
I mean,
just damage to the car.
It does sound like both of these cases were horrendous miscarriages of justice. Dreadful.
Absolutely.
So this quashed conviction then led the way for Beamish's conviction being overturned in 2005. And it was established that both women were probably murdered by Eric Edgar Cooke, as he had admitted 10 minutes before his execution. And Perth lawyers Tom Percy QC and Jonathan Davis worked pro bono on the appeals for 7 years and have since received awards for their efforts. A couple of top blokes.
Top blokes. Top bloke awards.
Top bloke.
T-shirt and a can of Castlemaine Forex in the post to you.
Top bloke, as opposed to Eric Edgar Cooke, titled Twat. The other
He gets Twat of the Week award.
Complete swamp. The other end of the spectrum. Top twat of the week. Well done, Eric. You've killed 8 people. Top twat.
Absolutely. And second twat of the week goes to the Australian justice system, who, despite the admission of guilt from him, spent another several years trying to put it through the courts and finally finding those people innocent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how horrible would that be? So these crimes took place in the 60s. Wasn't until the noughties they were found to be not guilty.
Jesus.
And the fact that Darryl Beamish was almost hung for it.
Yeah.
Dreadful, dreadful, dreadful miscarriages of justice.
Only just saved. Did they get any kind of compensation? Or
not much. I think I read that one of them got in the region of 400,000 Australian dollars as compensation, which doesn't sound like a lot.
No, I mean, it's going to be difficult to find a job for those 40 years whilst you're a convicted murderer.
Yeah.
Even if you're not in prison, even if you're out and free.
And the emotional stress. I mean, can you imagine how horrible it is to live your life knowing that you were innocent of a crime that you were in prison for? Dreadful. Yeah. So there you have it. That was my little delve into some modern history there, Sam, from Australia, from our friends in Australia.
Fantastic. And have the two guys spoken out about what happened to them?
Yes, I think there have been documentaries made, there have been books written. In fact, I think it was Darryl Beamish who, a couple of years prior to his conviction being quashed, he actually wrote a book to try and get his side of the story across, because he was out of prison by that point. So yeah, I think if you live in Western Australia, it's a fairly well-known story. It's something you'll have seen in the newspapers quite a lot. I think they've done a number of interviews as well. They've been on TV, on radio, and yeah, very, very interesting case when I started looking at it.
I'll try and put some links to some of those documentaries in the podcast description.
Yes, you can put a link to the rather gruff-looking Eric Edgar Cooke as well, who was hung at the age of 33. He does look like a miserable Bob Hoskins. he does look like a serial killer, I'll be honest with you. There are lots of good photos actually that you can find online of him showing the Western Australia police where he murdered many of his victims.
How delightful.
So yeah, there are lots of good pictures. It reminds me in fact of an excellent museum I've been to in Sydney. It's a fantastic museum. I forgot what its official name is called, but it's about the early criminals that were active in Sydney in the early years of the city. And they've got some fantastic photographs of these criminals. Very, very gruesome museum. Really, really excellent. I think it's actually in with the old police station in Sydney as well.
Yeah, there's a similar museum in Manchester which I really want to go and visit. I haven't had a chance to yet because it's quite small. It's only open a couple of days a week in the middle of the week. Yes, fantastic. If I ever find myself in Australia, I'll definitely go to the...
It's a goodie.
Museum of Criminals. That is Australia.
Yeah, that is... The Sydney Crime Museum, the Justice and Police Museum. Very, very nice.
Top museum of bottom blokes. No, hang on.
No. Different terminology. That's just...
No, hang on.
Going back to blasphemy laws, were they not connected with The Life of Brian, the Monty Python film, being banned?
Yes, they were. And again, Mary Whitehouse, she was responsible for that. But I don't think, I think it comes down to a similar thing of it was blasphemy, but screenplays aren't covered by the laws. I will have to look that up, but I think that was what happened with The Life of Brian.
Here we go. 39 local authorities in the United Kingdom either imposed an outright ban...
Yeah, it was banned in cinemas.
...or made it X-rated. Ireland and Norway banned its showing, almost for decades, I think, in some of these countries.
Wow.
It's good. Posters in Sweden read, "So funny, it was banned in Norway." Excellent.
Nice.
Jolly good, yes, and very little smut.
Well, despite our best efforts.
We did sneak a few in.
Right, well, have you had any thoughts on what we could do next week, Tom?
Now, what did I think? Health.
Ooh, very nice. Yeah, I like that.
I thought health, and I can't remember why. Health, what was the other one I thought? Exercise.
Exercise.
I thought we could do exercise one week.
Yes. Well, let's do health. You can bring in exercise into health, can't you?
Done.
Amazing. Well, to our lovely audience, thank you so much for listening in to our more or less coherent rambles this week. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe on your podcast app of choice and share it with your friends. You can also find us on social media on the rare occasions we can be bothered to post anything. We are That Was Genius Podcast on Facebook, at That Was Genius on Instagram, and that_was_genius on Twitter. You can also pop us an email if you like. We're at thatwasgeniuscast@gmail.com, just to add a fourth completely different username to the mix.
Excellent. It's always nice to hear from people as well, isn't it, Sam?
It is nice to hear from people.
Feedback is good, isn't it, Sam, when given constructively.
I wonder where you're going with this, Tom. I wonder where you're going with this.
However...
And on that note, see you next week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.